I'm Will Friedrich.
And I'm Tom Crivello.
And I'm Gary Grunau.
It's December 2nd, 2017, and we're at Schlitz Park.
And Tommy Barrett is behind the camera. All right. Hi, Mr. Grunau.
Good morning, Will. How are you?
Good. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about your early childhood? So, when and where were you born?
I was born right next to my mother at Milwaukee Hospital on about 20th and State Street. There's a building out there that was called the Maternity Pavilion. It was only used for birthing of kids that lived in the city.
And what day was that?
What day was it? It was April 17th, 1939. I'm not sure the day of the week.
Can you tell me about your earliest memories as a young child?
My earliest memories, my parents lived on South Shore Drive, right up above the South Shore Yacht Club. And so the kids in the neighborhood there, actually we lived there until I was about 6 years old. So going to school there at Trowbridge, pals in the neighborhood, just had a good time. And that's probably my earliest happy memories. I didn't have many sad memories. I had my tonsils a lot, I remember that, but that's a thrill you guys probably haven't had yet.
Can you tell me a little bit about Bayview as you were growing up?
Bayview as a community? Bayview was an industrial community back in those days. There was a steel mill down on the lake down there that was it was the site of one of the biggest labor riots ever, where the police came in and shot a lot of the union people. The mill eventually closed, and when I lived there, there were still concrete abutments. It's now where the Coast Guard station is, if you know where that is. And so it was industrial. It was primarily German, Italian, and Irish that worked there, and a lot of the people were employed at the steel mill.
Can you describe your family? Who did you live with? What your parents do? What were your sisters like, etc.?
There were 5 of us in the Grunau family. My dad was the second generation in a construction company, the Grunau company. I was the third, and then my oldest son was the fourth, and then we finally sold the company. But he worked there, and right on South KK, South Kinnickinnick Avenue, right across from Immaculate Conception Church. My mom worked part-time at the old Boston store, and I had 2 other sisters. So there were 3 of us, 5 in the family totally, who lived in Bayview.
In elementary and middle school, what kind of student were you, and what were your interests?
I was an exceptional student. I had an aunt, my mom's sister, who was a school teacher, that no matter where I lived, she taught in that school. She did not marry until after she retired. She taught in MTS till she was 67 years old. And then after that, when she retired, she married a man who was a retired Lutheran minister. And they traveled everywhere. But she watched me very closely, and I always had pretty darn good grades.
Do you have any early memories of working for your dad?
Not my dad as much, but I worked, as I got into high school, I worked for the contracting firm every summer, painting trailers, doing work out in the yard, stuff like that. So I probably started working for the construction business when I was 14, 15 years old.
I understand that you went to Bayview High School. Can you tell us a little about the high school and what it was like when you went there?
Bayview High School is located right off of KK, right off of the same street that I lived on earlier before we were on South Shore Drive. The nickname was the Red Cats. It was predominantly a white school at that time because it was a neighborhood school. It was very strong in the theater arts. They had a beautiful music program, dance program, and also acting program. It was interesting. There was a classmate of mine by the name of John Neumeyer was just in the paper here a couple Sundays ago. He's the leader of the Hamburg Ballet and has been the artistic director in Germany for years. But we had just a great school.
Can you tell us how you got into Cornell?
I got into Cornell by taking a test and by going out there all myself. My parents had not seen the school, and I had been accepted at Purdue, but I knew some people who were alumni of Cornell that ran a trip. Back in those days, a trip wasn't flying out. You took the train to Chicago, the train to Detroit, the train to Syracuse, and then you took a bus down to the school. So I went out there, I saw the school and I liked it, and I applied to, it's a 5-year engineering program. And I was accepted, and I went back to the school the next fall. My parents didn't really see the school till my 3rd year. They went out with me to see the school in the fall.
What did you study at Cornell, and how was the experience?
When did I study there?
What did you study?
Oh, I studied, I started out in engineering, and there's about 5 or 6 different specialties: civil, architectural engineering, metallurgical, things like that, mechanical. And I ended up in mechanical engineering because my family company was primarily in heating and ventilating and stuff like that, which is classified as mechanical. So I graduated with a 5-year degree in mechanical engineering in 1962.
What was it like to go to college in the 50s?
What was it like? It was great. New York had an 18-year-old open bar law. You could drink at 18. Back in those days, you could drink at 18 in Wisconsin, but it was called near beer, 3.2 beer, light beer. But I mean, just the social side of it was incredibly different. Plus the school, Cornell's a school of about 13,000 students. Very diverse. They got a big school of veterinary, animal husbandry, they called it, where they raised animals. Women went to school there, a lot of Canadians, a lot of engineering, had their own law school. So it was a complete university on a campus outside of Ithaca, New York, upstate New York.
I know that you almost completed a master's degree at Marquette University. Can you please elaborate on that and the experience?
I came out of Cornell with a 5-year degree because that's how long it was, and I thought that I should get a master's, an MBA also, but I wanted to be back here, and so I applied at Marquette, and while I was working, I attended the first year of a 2-year program to get my MBA. And not to sound improper, I found it was very basic stuff. I mean, it was things that I had in my 4th and 5th year at Cornell. So I just decided, along with the professors, there was no real gain for me to learn any more. So I never finished the 2nd year of the MBA program. I only had 1 year.
What was your, you were in the ROTC for a month in college, you said?
I was in what, excuse me?
The ROTC?
Oh yeah, I joined, when I went to Cornell, I joined ROTC, or as they call it, ROTC, which was you're part of the military, you get some military training. But I got into it and I found that my eyes were below the standard. So even though I wore glasses at the time, I did not qualify to serve in the military, so I did not.
What was your first job out of college? Can you tell us about it?
Well, obviously in a family-held, not obviously, but in a family-held company, I just moved into that field, and I'd worked every summer since probably my freshman year in high school. So my first job was just to continue on applying some of the mechanical engineering things I picked up in college to the actual construction process. And I eventually worked up that I became president of the Grunau company when I was 35 years old.
Can you tell us a little bit of the specifics, like who was your boss and what you did in that role in the early years?
Well, at that time my grandfather was still alive, and my dad and his brother my uncle were there too. So the three of them were there. But when I came to the company, we were about this big. And by the time about 8 years later, we're probably 6 or 7 times as big. So we had more project managers and engineers. And so I was named the president running the whole operation, as I said, when I was 35 years old.
What sort of major projects did you first work on in the Grunau company in those?
Well, when I started with the Grunau company, we were predominantly local, and but we did the post office downtown. We did what's now the U.S. Bank building, was the old First Wisconsin Bank building on the lake. We did the post office, we did some hospital work, St. Joe's, St. Luke's, etc. Then through that, though, we worked for some national contractors, and one in particular started to work in Indianapolis. So we started to do work in Indianapolis. Then they went to Florida, so we followed them to Florida. So over a period of probably 10, 15 years, we literally worked from Texas to Florida to North Carolina to Wisconsin. We were all over the country. We grew we were the second largest contractor in the mechanical field in the country.
Can you tell us about the U.S. Bank building and how you were involved with that?
We did all the mechanical on it. We did all the piping, all the fire sprinkler, all the plumbing, all the sheet metal, all the miscellaneous iron, etc.
Can you talk about building and physical landscape of where you work?
Where I work now?
Or where you did work in those early years?
In those years? Well, I was the director. I made sure the right people were there, they were trained properly, they were doing the job properly. I was the customer contact. If there was a problem or something had to be talked about, I handled it. So I was the manager of the projects.
So you obviously lived through the prime of civil rights protests here in Milwaukee. Do you have any memories of those protests, especially in the year 1967?
Could you repeat that question again? I'm sorry. I missed.
So you lived through the prime of civil rights protests?
Oh, the civil rights protests. Yeah, that, as I said earlier, even Bayview at that year was primarily Northern European. And there was an influx of people from the South that started to move here in the late 60s. And a lot of these people didn't have the technical skills. They were strong back and this and that. The construction business was a little bit different because the historical way that the European construction business was run was the father would enter into a trade as a carpenter or a steam fitter, and then he would have an apprentice, which is usually his son, and he'd train his son to be the next generation. Well, what happened was, and they did that, but what that meant is the trade stayed primarily white. And there was not a sense of closeness, and you go back and you look at any time in our history. I mean, the Italians didn't like the Irish, didn't like the Spanish, didn't like the French, didn't like the English, and it exacerbated itself more with the African Americans and the white. And so we got to the point that we didn't have enough next generation employees coming into the trades, and so we had to work with the African Americans and the minorities. And that meant that there still is a big educational gap in this community. So we established special classes, special training to get them up where they could serve as an apprentice and get to that point. But there were some brutal fights because a lot of the union members didn't like that. They thought that was a white trade and should not have have other people in it. But we worked on it, and now if you take a look at it, there's some very sophisticated programs out there of starting people that have not been in the trades, even at a younger age. It's kind of a pre-apprenticeship program before they go to work in a 5-year program, which is the apprenticeship program.
All right, so you told us that you were involved with the Hyatt Regency here in Milwaukee. Can you tell us?
Yeah, we developed the Hyatt Regency. We were we were involved with an architect who turned out was more talk than depth, and he had a builder who kind of disappeared part of the way through it, and he couldn't finance the hotel. And I was lucky enough that some local people, bankers and insurance company, gave us the money to build it. So we ended up as the developer, which we had no intent to do when we went into it. So we opened that in about 1980 and owned that until about 2007, about 27 years. And that was really the first new hotel in town in a long time. We had a bunch of old second generation hotels, the Pfister, the Hilton, the Mark Plaza, etc.
You said you were involved in a lot of election committees. Could you talk about those and list them?
Talk about elections?
You said you were involved in election committees.
Yeah, in helping support candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's, you can't live in Milwaukee and not be involved in local politics. You've got aldermen, you've got county supervisors and mayor and this and that, and as you get more and more visible, they're more and more talking to you. Number one, they need money, but number two, they're looking for your ideas also. So we formed committees to back some of the candidates that we thought were pretty good, to help get them elected.
When did you first meet your first wife, Linda?
I met Linda when I graduated from Cornell. I came home and lived at my parents' house in Elm Grove, and my mother was a special person. After about 3 months, she said, "You got to be out of here in 2 months or start paying rent." So, meanwhile, I was dating Linda, and that kind of accelerated the thought of maybe we should get married and live by ourselves and not have to pay rent to my mother. So I probably moved in with Linda about a year after I graduated from college.
Did you have any children?
Do I have children? I have 3 boys.
Could you talk about them?
3 boys, and now there's 11 grandchildren.
Can you list their names and
Kind of what?
list their names, please?
List their names?
Yeah.
The three children are Paul, Dan, and John. And then Paul has 4 children. Grace, who just graduated from Boston College and works in New York now. And then Hank Grunau is at St. Olaf's outside of St. Paul. He's a junior. Then they have a son, Gus Grunau, who's a junior in high school in St. Paul. And they have a daughter, Sadie, who is a freshman in high school in St. Paul. And the second son, Dan, has 4 boys. Alex, who's now 19, Jonathan, who's 17, Grant, who's 15, and Andy, who's 7. Then the youngest son, John, lives here in Milwaukee, and they have 2 boys and a girl, Wesley, Cece, and Wilson, all younger, 8, 5, and 4.
So you told us that you passed some legislation to create a Wisconsin Center.
Yeah, when we were involved with the Hyatt, we were stuck because our market wasn't growing. And hotels work, but you need convention centers where people can meet. Now, before your time, we had an old convention center. Our mayor at the time was a fellow named John Norquist. And he described it as an old VCR box, the convention center, that's what it looked like. And it wasn't big enough. And the public couldn't get their act together to do it. It's an interesting side story, but Milwaukee was basically a socialist town. wasn't Democrats, wasn't Republicans, socialist and business. And that's a traditional way of thing coming out of Germany, where the socialists ran the government and the business ran the business, and they never really did much together. So the government wasn't doing anything, so our group at the Hyatt, myself and our attorney and our PR guy, came up with a piece of legislation that it took us almost 3 years to get through Madison, that established the Wisconsin Center District, basically of Milwaukee County, where we could put a tax on ourselves to pay for the convention center. And we got the Restaurant Association to help us, and eventually we sold that, and we got the legislation passed, and that provided the funding then for the new convention center, which is there.
Could you talk about the greater role of the Wisconsin Center and how it is important to the city?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that again? I missed that too.
Can you talk about the greater role of the convention center to the city, like, and how it affects the city?
Well, the convention center obviously brings people to meetings. The meetings fill the hotels. In fact, now they're at the next step. We increased the convention center from about 100,000 feet to 200. Now they think they need another 100 to get to 300. But you don't build a convention center without building a hotel, because you need people, you need rooms for the people to stay in. So how it helps you is that when more people come to town, tourists and people to meetings, you have more meetings and you have to hire more people. The fastest vocation for minority people to get involved in and to get trained is in the hospitality business. They can get trained in schools like MATC, or they can get trained like the Hyatt. Ours was the Hyatt, where the Hyatt has their own training programs to work with these people. So it's a great entry position job for our employees, hospitality. That's why I'm excited about the Bucks. I'm excited about the talk about more space now in a convention center, because that'll hire more people. And we ran, back when we started the Hyatt, we were probably running 55% minority employees. Those were all first-time employees. And there still are some there 32 years later.
What is the Milwaukee Academy of Science?
Milwaukee Academy of Science, I've always been interested in education. As you probably know, there's what's called the public education system, then there's the private. Public education is somebody like MPS, Whitefish Bay, Shorewood. Then there's the private, sponsored by somebody like Marquette, like your school. Well, there's another way that the state was able to create a funding system that's like Milwaukee Public Schools, that we create, a charter school is created by creating your own school board. And then you have open meetings, you're subject to the same regulations of the state, DPI, Department of Public Instruction, as MPS. So we have financial reports we have to file and everything else like that. Well, we started the Milwaukee Academy of Science as a school to get young students involved in life science and STEM education, if you know what that is, which I'm sure you do. It's about 16 years old, and I am now the chair of the board there. I will be for 3 years. We've got 1,100 kids, K-12, kindergarten through 12th grade. We're 99.9% African American, and our kids are just doing wonderfully. Scholastically, they're getting full rides to Northwestern, Howard, Madison, Marquette, etc. We are knocking them dead. And we got great athletes too. We finished second in the girls' state basketball, and we'll win it this year. We got a junior who's the best player in the state, and we got a great young boy guard, a sophomore, who's number 2 player in the state right now too.
Why did you feel the need to create the Milwaukee Academy of Science?
Why did I get involved?
Yeah.
It's something that had to be done. This city is going to fail if we don't produce people that are trained to fill the jobs. And unfortunately, we are ranked as still the most segregated city in the United States. We have the majority of our African Americans living on the north side, the majority of the Hispanic on the south side. The Hispanic community has really got some traction. There's some equity that went into it. There have been private schools that have been built. Gus Ramirez just finished a $35 million school that he donated. Other things like that are happening in the Hispanic community. It's not happening in the African American community. So I go back maybe to my roots in the construction business. The business community of this city has to get behind and straighten out the African American side of town. When you look at the male population, the number of people that are incarcerated from that central city of African Americans is unbelievable. And the kids are dropping out of school, there's no family units. We've got students in those 1,100 kids that are homeless. They may live with their grandpa one day, their aunt the next day, they don't know where the hell they're going. And so we gotta work with them and we gotta get them out of that community. It's called upward mobility. They've gotta be able to get out of that geographical social environment, and that's what we're trying to do.
Can you explain the various companies in the Grunau group and what they do?
Well, we have now sold the base construction business of Grunau Group. So now we still have the development business, which owns Schlitz Park here, along with the Sampson family, our partner. And we have other development things we're doing. And so it's kind of evolved back to this place, which is about 40 acres. There's 4,000 people that work here, 800,000 square feet. And also some volunteer work. I do a lot of volunteer work with other organizations in town. But I don't really have a full-time job working for somebody. I run Schlitz, so if you want to say I'm working for myself, that's fine. But we have a staff, probably about 25 people here who run Schlitz for us. And that's my main business right now.
Can you talk about how you took over or became the leader of the Grunau Corporation?
Well, it was generational, probably, of anything in Grunau. My grandfather became quite elderly, and my dad got to the point he retired, even though I was president, and took the presidency away from him, and he went up to chairman of the board for 15 years. And then he retired, and then I ran it, and then I sold it to my son. My sisters and I ended up owning the company, and we decided that we wanted one person to take it forward, so my son ended up running the company and owning it, and paid us out for it. So it was a generational thing. It was always family leadership. Even our respective companies were run by brothers-in-laws or other people like that.
Can you talk about what type of processes and tactics, business tactics that you use to find so much success?
About processes in business, you mean, or what?
Can you explain how you were so successful, basically?
I think I did a fairly decent job in business by working my butt off, but it also, I have an innate ability to bring people together that makes them want to work together to create a better project. And it's the easiest thing to do is one job and go home at 5 o'clock at night and forget about it. That I constantly worry about, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing it properly? Are we doing everything we can? So I became known as a guy that got things done. That on the difficult jobs like the convention center, like the Riverwalk system, which we created basically, construction jobs, Discovery World, I actually took the whole project over. And part of it was our building, but part of it was just making it work in the community. So I'd bring other people in that either funded or would do their role in it. And that's something I've always enjoyed, is meeting people and building teams. And when you build teams, it's a lot easier than trying to do it by yourself. And so I've been pretty successful in that area.
When did you first realize that Schlitz Park was a prime place for redevelopment?
When we bought Schlitz, it was right after we built the Hyatt. We bought Schlitz in 1983. And Schlitz was the world's largest brewery at the time. And they got into some trouble. They, in their infinite wisdom, decided that if you made beer faster, it could increase your capacity. So beer is a slow-moving process. You brew it, then you ferment it in big tanks, and then you age it. It takes 30, 45 days to make beer. They figured out that if they cut that time in half, they'd in essence double their capacity. So they did that. They put agitators in these big tanks to make the chemical process work better. The unfortunate thing was the beer tastes like you know what. They ruined the taste. Then they started adding chemicals to correct the taste out, and that made the beer change color and didn't foam right. And they were the largest brewery, and then Anheuser-Busch went by them and their volume dropped off. They could have sold the brewery before they did for probably twice as much money, but they ran it down. They sold it to Peter Stroh's Brewery in Detroit. And he took a strike against the brewery workers, and this brewery was shut down. So Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser went right by him. They got stuck. Peter Stroh's wanted out of it. This thing laid empty for almost a year, and we came in and we bought it from him. We had no idea what we were going to do with it. Back in those days, you just called your banker up, and he said, sure, we'll give you the money. So we bought it, and we started thinking about converting some of it to offices. This was an office building now, this Bottle House B. This is where the can plant was that Schlitz had gone into around the country, the can plant administration. So we converted each of the 7 buildings one at a time into an office situation. We tore down a lot of square footage of tanks and silos that we couldn't use, and we created open parking. And pretty soon it dawns on us that we had a campus of 40-some acres, 900,000 square feet, that we could provide free parking for everybody, and you just didn't have that downtown. And we were all the way along the river. We built a river walk, and away it went. So, but it was not. I can tell you from the day we said we should look at buying this thing to the day that we shook hands was only about 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And this place was dirty. There was asbestos everywhere, and we had to clean all that crap out of here.
Can you talk about the greater role of Schlitz Park and how it's become so successful in the city today?
Well, we got lucky. We grew. We had a bunch of institutional people in here. The county was in here, insurance companies, a lot of people. But back in about 2006 and 7, the economy went down, the county closed, boom. So out of our roughly 900,000 feet, we were faced with 400,000 feet being empty, which scares the hell out of you because you're not cash flowing. That's just about when I left the construction business. So I became full-time here in the development business. And we went out and we repurposed it. We put in 3 fitness centers here, 3 showers. We had a big bike to work program. We brought in the Wisconsin Bike Federation. Anybody who works here can get their bike tuned up once a month. There's a group up on King Drive. It's called Dream Bikes. They take kids from MPS, and Trek, a big manufacturer, actually trains them to do the work. And we provide it free for our employees. So exercise, new places to eat, cafeterias, meeting rooms like this. We created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these in our different buildings where people can use for nothing. And if you've gone up and down Water Street, you've noticed the social economic atmosphere changed, and it's like So there's about 4,000 apartments that have been built around here. And these are the young, innovative people that companies want. So we provide the services that they want, the exercise and all this other stuff, and it all came together. And as a result, office vacancies in the suburbs started to climb, and people moved downtown. Companies now, yet, I've got out of the almost 900,000 feet, we got 130,000 square foot parcel open. That's all we got, and we got 3 companies looking at it now that want to move downtown. They can get employees downtown, they can't get out in Brookfield or other places.
Can you tell us about the Milwaukee Riverwalk?
John Norquist was our mayor, became our mayor, a very young man at the time. It was about 25 years ago. He was about 40 years old. And he is an urbanist. He changed downtown. I created the Milwaukee Riverwalk District, which was our businesses up and down the river. He was a good friend, still is a good friend of mine. And we decided that where the city at one time, the 3 rivers, had lived on the river, it turned its back on it. And when you get industry like we did in tanneries and breweries and even machine shops, these people used the river as water coming in and then put the effluent going back into the river that was contaminated. And so they ruined the river. The state in their infinite wisdom built a dam up at North Avenue, one up at Hubbard, and it was still, there were no fish, nothing. So John Norquist called me one day and said, let's have a beer. He said, I'm going to tear out the North Avenue Dam, get that done, create the flow, put fish back in there, and we're going to build some river walks. So we decided rather than building one at a time to create a district, which went all the way through downtown, where we created a taxation district where 22% of the cost is paid for by the companies and 78% is paid for by the public. That total cost of those two, from the original 1,000 feet, has grown to almost 6 miles now of Riverwalk. And there's about $60 million invested, of which about 1/3 is from the private sector and 2/3 is from the public. That $60-some million of investment has increased our property values by over $1 billion. 4,000 housing units, 4,000 jobs. And even now, I call it the gift that keeps giving, because now the Riverwalks are being extended. They are all the way down to Summerfest. They go around into the Lake Walk now, but they're being extended out to Menominee towards Harley-Davidson and down the Kinnickinnick to the south side too. So there isn't a project right now on the river that's not putting a Riverwalk in. And it's going to continue to grow. So it's cool. It changed our city.
Can you talk about how it has shaped the city a little bit?
Talk about
How it's shaped the city?
how it changed it? Young people living downtown. Young people, married, single, whatever you want to call it, want to be where the action is, where they have outdoor space. We got the lakefront, we got parks. A big thing happened about the same time, and that's the Pabst Theater group, Gary Witt. Mike Cudahy got talked into buying the Pabst Theater. The city was running it, and it was going into the ground. So Mike bought it for $1 and invested $2.5 million into it. The Pabst Theater group now is the Pabst Theater, the Riverside, and Turner Hall. Those 3 places used to be busy, a cumulative total of probably 100 nights a year. Right now there's 450 nights a year that are booked in those 3 places. Young people love entertainment. They love to walk there, have a beer on the way home, and work in the neighborhood. And so it's the entertainment, the environment, the jobs, and just the excitement about being downtown. Try walking to the store out in Brookfield, you're not going to do that.
As a businessman, what way of thinking do you most commonly apply to your work?
What way of thinking do I apply to my work?
Yeah.
To plan something?
Yeah.
Well, usually I think about the people that would be the best to work together on something. And then I'm not afraid to question something and say, is this the best way to do it? We have gained a reputation, you can call it value engineering, you can call it redesign, whatever you want to call it. But just because somebody says you ought to do something from here to there and do this and that, you've got to double and second guess to make sure that's the best way to do it. And if you got enough bright people working with you, you can usually come up with better ways and a more economical way to do something. And still be friendly enough that you don't irritate somebody that you're superseding what their intent was. So we've been pretty darn successful with our projects. And we kind of developed a reputation of being the urban builder, where we would take old buildings such as Schlitz, such as where MIAD now, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, other places like that. Those are old buildings that we rehabbed for today's usage.
You didn't mention the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design before. Can you explain what you did there?
We took an old warehouse and converted it into an art school. Underutilized building. I mean, you can, it's more economical to take old buildings and convert them because you don't have to build the foundations and the roof and everything else. So we've done a lot of that. We've converted schools from Milwaukee Public. Actually, the Milwaukee Academy of Science was the old Milwaukee Hospital. We took a hospital and converted it into a school. We took, there's a thing called the Grand Avenue School. That was for MPS. That was the old county emergency hospital. We converted that into a high school on Wisconsin Avenue. That's kind of what we do. We find adaptive reuses that are exciting, and there's high ceilings, there's great architecture. They don't build buildings like this anymore. They can't afford to.
We're going to take a break now.
Break time?
Yeah, break. Welcome back, Mr. Grunau.
It's good to be back with you.
Do you think you could talk about the generational changes and how you've seen people change throughout your life?
I think because I started under my grandfather, then my father, then myself, then my son, and now we don't have any grandchildren working in the businesses, but at least you get to know them and you see their attitudes. As I talked earlier, we're a very racially divided city, geographically, environmentally, everything, socially. And that hurts us. We look at this big job for Foxconn right now and 12,000 employees, and our governor is wanting to spend $7 million to advertise in Chicago to bring people up here to fill it, where we've gone past the way we could have done it ourselves, which is educated our own people and provide transportation for our people to get to work there. 12,000 employees, you go a mile and a half north of here to the central city, there's that many people out of work. You go up into the prisons in the state, and the incarceration rate in the African American community is unbelievable. Now, what I've seen through the years is that every generation gets a little bit more understanding of the problem and wanting to fix it. And I have great hope for you guys who are in high school, and also your ladies who aren't in high school with you, but they're in their own high school, that your generation hopefully will be able to change this and continue working on. It's very important that everybody has the same educational opportunities and that everybody gets a chance to move ahead. And that means we've got to spend money on education, on preschool, on grade school, middle school, high school, college opportunities, STEM, life science. There's such a shortage of people right now. Those are the Foxconn people. It's got to be STEM, technologically trained. I don't see right now that bitterness that existed 2 generations ago with my grandfather, who would be 130 right now, but those people always didn't like other ethnic groups, let alone racial groups, Irish didn't like the Germans, didn't like the Poles, didn't like the Italians, etc. That's all pretty much evaporated right now. There's an understanding at your age group that African American and Hispanic kids and Muslims and everybody else are pretty good kids and have to be worked together. We're at a horrible time. I've never seen it the way the press and our leadership, national and in some cases state leadership, is hateful, and that's horrible. Playing one ethnic or religious group against another one is not going to take us to where we have to be as a city. Not spending money on infrastructure to provide the education and transportation that is needed is going to cause us long-term problems, because we're not going to be able to fulfill these jobs. And it's going to be a 12,000 person, 30 million square foot plant sitting in Racine, with the people who are going to fill those jobs right now are people from Northern Illinois, and that's not right. We need to invest our own capital, our own feelings, and find ways that we can do it, and also our political leadership, who again plays towards the white majority, has to be shown what to do. And if not, the rest of us have to vote them out of office and do the right thing. So you guys hurry up and get to voting age, because we need this to get done.
You mentioned that your son was involved with DSHA. Can you talk about that?
Excuse me, I missed part of that.
Your son is involved with DSHA, you said?
Yeah, he was, his daughter, well, his kids grew up in Whitefish Bay, and he has girl, boy, boy, girl. So the oldest girl decided that she wanted to go, and they were Catholic, to go to a girls' school. And while there's Marquette, there's the HSA, and she went there, and he became active there. He knew the president of the school, Helen Bartel, who came from Alberno, and she got him on the board, and then he was chairman of the board, and then he raised a bunch of money for him. She's now graduated from college, and actually he moved up to the St. Paul area, and he lives up there now. But his youngest daughter is in the same type school up there that his oldest daughter was here, Grace was. It's a girls' private school.
Can you talk about the medical problems you have specifically, or you had dealing with specifically cancer?
Again, I'm sorry, you're a little bit light.
Can you talk about the medical struggles you've dealt with?
That I've had the medical struggles? Well, getting old is the biggest one, but I've had my ups and downs in my life. I had prostate cancer back 15 years ago, and it became very public because I was on a live TV show where the announcer, Mike Goucher, looked at me. He said, "I understand you've had prostate cancer. Has it changed your life?" He never warned me on the subject. And I found that I could become much more vocal and talk about it, and I advised a lot of young men who had it about, because everybody gets concerned about what I do about it. There's about 18 different things you can do. So I did a lot of work in that area. Then I ended up with I had a detached retina in my right eye, and that's always a fearsome thing because they put a buckle on your eyeball, and I worked with people on that, and now I just went through well, actually I had a problem with my left knee too, a torn meniscus I had to have taken care of. Now last May of this year, I developed a day that I couldn't articulate what I wanted to say. And it turned out that I had a brain tumor. In my head there was a malignant brain tumor that I spent basically from May till October in chemo and full brain radiation. But that's pretty well cleaned up right now. I'm getting my strength back. Chemo just knocks the crap out of you. But in each one of those, I've become very vocal. People want to talk about it. I'm not afraid of it. And every one of them, there's, as I hope you guys, and I'm sure you'll find out, or somebody in your family, that when there's an illness, there's 3 or 4 different things you can do. And the best thing you can do is talk to doctors, and trust them. You can't shortcut that stuff. And so I feel pretty good now. My wife talked to me into taking a cognitive test. I don't know if that is, where they can see where your brain is operating at what age. And often when you have full brain type radiation, it brings on early Alzheimer's or dementia. So I went through a 2.5-hour test about a month ago to see where I was, and it was very gratifying because my brain still works pretty good. And the guy said, "God, you're like a 45-year-old." And I said, "Well, I hope somebody would pay me like that." But a lot of things I could remember, so that's cool. But I'm going to have one now. It's monitoring, and I'm going to have one of those tests every 6 months just to make sure that, because there are things they can do to sharpen how cognitive you are also. Those are things that scare the hell out of people. You think you're going to go crazy and look like a pigeon sitting in the corner, but you got to work with the docs.
Can you talk about how you've seen the infrastructure of Milwaukee change, specifically towards transportation with things like highways and now with the streetcar that they're trying to add?
Well, okay, how Milwaukee is going to change, number one, is we're going to have a minority mayor. I don't know if it'll be in this next election, but we'll definitely be in the next 2 elections. Right now, the whites are in the minority in this city. And so we're going to get a non-white mayor, which will be good. The problem we have in this city is that we are a home for a lot of our minorities, etc. And we are looked at in other parts of the state as basically a social welfare hole in the ground where the state collects taxes and dumps it into Milwaukee, which is further from the truth because Milwaukee sends more of our tax money to other parts of the state than the other parts do to us. But because of this, and because of again, it's the bias on the part of people who live out in the state. They don't like light rail, they don't like streetcars, they don't like people who don't look like them in their backyard. Fearsome. Talk radio in this city, most of those guys are now gone, was horrible about how nobody in Greenfield should be supporting blacks moving into Greenfield, for instance, and stuff like that. And that caused fear. It was like our president's ad I talked about earlier of the Muslims killing the young white kids. He said, well, I know it's probably wrong, but you got to be worried about something like that. Well, that's bullshit. Pardon me. Good Catholic school. But that's what builds hatred. And hatred amongst people is just horrible. It's counterproductive to creating people working together. And I would just hope, and I see you guys, and I see you, and as I said, I'm very proud to be part of this charter school. And we are reaching out now, we're good enough, we're playing an independent schedule, and we're playing kids all over the state. And it used to be very tough to get those kids to come down to 22nd and State on their buses, because they didn't think they'd get out of there and go home alive. And they find out it's a marvelous school, and the kids have a good time, and there's music, and it's, the more you get people together and working together, the more friendly they become and the better it is. So I'm very hopeful that I don't see the evidence of the prejudice that I saw in these previous age groups or generations. But you people really, I mean, we're at a critical point now with this hateful end of it. You people are really an important generation for us.
Okay, can you talk about the freeway system, and were you disappointed when it was implemented?
Well, the freeway system's horrible. They don't want, number one, the freeway system is overbuilt and it destroyed a lot of neighborhoods. But now that you've got it done, you got to finish it. And you can't, it was easy, it was interesting. I was at a meeting on Foxconn, and one of the things the state's giving them is $300 million to add a lane to 94 going by Racine and their plant. $300 million. But where are they taking that? They're taking that out of the budget from the zoo interchange to the one at Miller Park. So that's only 3 lanes. If you drive in, you come in that way in the morning, it's like a parking lot. That should be 4 to 5 lanes. But the state, Walker, took that money and gave it to putting it in express in I-94. The interesting thing was that he announced this to the negotiating group from Foxconn, and the head guy looked at him and he said, I don't understand why you're doing that. He said, why? He said, you need that. And he says, no, he said, what you should be doing is a dedicated lane for driverless cars and trucks. And I don't know if you saw right now, or Elon Musk and stuff he's doing is developing a truck that'll go 500 miles an hour, and it'll be on a driverless lane and getting product from their plant to their consumers. You don't need all these goddamn lanes right now as we go to driverless cars. But that's how it changes. And if you don't have that innovative, forward-looking spirit, you're going to miss opportunities like that.
How have you seen the city change, especially compared to the middle of your life towards now?
How things have changed?
In the city, yeah.
Technology, I saw something at one time when we had our first moonshot, that the amount of technology that's being developed right now is growing like this. And you look at, I'm involved also at MSOE, I'm on their corporate board, and they just got $35 million gift for a computational lab, which is a supercomputer that'll work in AI. I don't know if you know what AI is, artificial intelligence. Do you know that somebody like IBM, Google, IBM particularly, I believe the number is $40 billion over the last 3 years building artificial intelligence, building data and facts. They now can use your brain as a model to find out what's wrong with it because of all the data that they've been able to put in there. We are still having our brains ahead of artificial intelligence, but now you're starting to see arguments that AI is going to get ahead of our brains. So now where we have always, who was it, Bobby Fischer, these big guys that played chess, played against a machine, they could kill a machine. Now the machines are wiping them out. And that's where the society is going to. And we need supercomputer, AI, people that think out of the box to accommodate that stuff.
What things are you most excited for in the future of development here in Milwaukee?
The realization that we've got to integrate our whole society educationally and economically. And I think that somebody's going to realize that we can't attract any more business if we don't start training our people. And that's our biggest drawback right now. Our prison system's going like this, and we've got to get those people educated. And that's what I see at this charter school I'm part of. If you can see those kids in their uniforms and how they're doing, 1,100 kids, it's unbelievable thrill to see how far they're going in their life.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I just think that this is a wonderful exercise, and I'm very pleased to meet the two Toms and Will here, and you guys have been very good, and I think this is a wonderful thing for you and for Marquette University High School to provide the experience in.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is tough time. All right, so this is now Tommy Baird interviewing. So, did you feel like your early successes were shaped by the time that you were working in? Like, did the recession affect you at all? Was the political climate a factor?
I don't think there was anything special about the time I was working in. I thought the opportunities were there because the construction business was always a very manual business, and it became more of a innovative, using different type equipment, different type materials. So there was more changes happening. So from that standpoint, there probably was a better time to be working because you could come up with new methods and stuff.
Did you experience any difficulty during the 70s when there was a lot of white flight and moved to the suburbs?
Well, that was part of the problem we had was the freeways, where we built freeways to get the people out of the city, and they moved way the hell out. And it was the white flight, and that established a white outer ring, which again then increased the density of minorities living within the city. And I mean, that continues on, and it's not the local politicians, it's the people in Madison who vote for the freeways, you gotta remember. And it's the people in Madison who vote for allowing our firemen and our policemen to live outside our city. We used to have, and most cities in the state require their firemen and the policemen to live in the city. We don't. Why? It's called the white vote.
So were there any projects that you remember that you really loved doing or that you didn't like doing?
I can't tell you of any project I didn't like doing. The one neat thing about the construction business that I can leave this place right now and the next hour and a half can probably run by 30 or 40 projects that we built. And every one of them was a joy. It's fun to do. Happy customers. You got it done on time and you made a couple bucks on it.
Are there any projects, or is there a project that you're the most proud of today, or do you not really regret that?
Of all the projects I did, the ones that I think just the project, which is a civic project and a construction, was the Riverwalk. And I think that literally changed the city more than anything else that's happened to this city. And of course, Schlitz and what happened here, providing, I think the maximum employment Schlitz ever had here was 2,000. We got 4,000 people working here now. That's a lot of people.
Did you have any mentors that guided you along the way? Do you have any mentors today?
I don't have any mentors today. The mentors along the way, well, probably my dad, also B.J. Sampson, my partner Scott Sampson's dad. Mike Cudahy, very good friend, 93 years old, still sharp as a tack. People like that.
Were there any lessons that they taught you or things that you still use today?
Mike Cudahy in particular was, and BJ was the same way. Can you build it better? Are you doing the right thing? Why are you doing it that way? Always questioning why you're doing something one way and is there a better way to do it?
And do you feel like you still provide that kind of insight to others today?
Right, I do. People like working for me because we work innovatively. We come up with new ways of doing things.
So one final question. What makes you stay in Milwaukee?
What makes me stay here?
Yeah.
Can't afford a plane ticket to get out, no. It's a very comfortable sized city. You know, as you live here all your life, you know a lot of people. And that helps you get things done. They're supportive, you're supportive of them. It's a good, hard-working city. You don't, we worked in other cities in the United States where things aren't quite as clean, let's just say, and getting things passed publicly, et cetera. We have got honest politicians. On the flip side, the most frustrating thing is the wide political divide between Milwaukee and Madison.
I guess I'll ask one more. Is there anything that you'd like to see return to Milwaukee, like past things that you wish would come back?
I don't know if there's anything I'd like to see return to Milwaukee. There's opportunities that we lost, like the high-speed train from Chicago to Madison, like the train called the KRM, which ran from Kenosha to Racine to Milwaukee, would have been incredible for Foxconn right now. Those were all backed by Milwaukee people, but people in Madison put the X to it. Wouldn't have cost the state a penny. I would like to see Miller Park downtown. Having a parking lot with 15,000 cars in it doesn't help the economy. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.